It is a well-attested fact that the dead are often more punctual than the living. Indeed, few things in life are, one might say, in death, are more reliable than the sudden appearance of a corpse to interrupt the gentle tedium of a country house breakfast. Thus it was that Lord Peter Wimsey, having risen scandalously early, by bachelor standards, to hunt down a pair of elusive quarto pamphlets from a local vicarage library, found himself instead contemplating a rather less literary discovery, namely, the body of Miss Agatha Tolland, maiden sister of the late Canon Tolland, seated upright in her writing chair, one hand neatly resting on a blotter as if mid-letter, and the other dangling with genteel finality at her side. She had, apparently, expired without fanfare and with such decorum that even the village doctor, a man not easily roused from his belief in laudanum and phlegm, had pronounced it a very fine death if one must choose. Unfortunately, the position of the paper knife in her chest somewhat contradicted that view. Lord Peter, who had not been invited to the village of Fenchurch Dallas to observe murders, but to unearth ecclesiastical curiosities, surveyed the scene with a mixture of mild irritation and irrepressible curiosity. "Well, well," he murmured, removing his monocle to clean it with his handkerchief embroidered with a small, incorrect quotation from Horace, which he claimed was deliberate. "That's no way to conclude correspondence. Dear Miss Tolland, if you were hoping to avoid a reply, this is certainly effective, though perhaps not in the spirit of epistolary decorum." The maid, a young woman with the overstrained composure of someone unused to dead bodies, but determined not to faint before titled witnesses, hovered behind him. "She never wrote letters, my lord," the girl said tremulously. "Miss Tolland. That's what's strange, sir. She didn't even keep a proper pen. Said it was all a waste of good ink and worse manners. She wouldn't even send a Christmas card, sir, not even to the bishop." "Then what?" asked Wimsey, gently turning over the sheet of paper on the blotter with a gloved finger. "Do." "We call this, the page was blank. No note, no scrawl. No desperate confession or Latin quotation, only a faint, half-formed impression where a pen had pressed lightly without ink. A gesture," Wimsey said softly, "and not even a complete one. Curious." At that moment, the village constable, one P.C. Nettlethorpe, whose boots were 3 sizes too large for both his feet and his intellect, entered with great ceremony and even greater tread. Mornin', my lord. Doctor says it's murder. Stabbed right through the left side. Blood's all gone into the cushion." "Yes," said Wimsey absently. "She bleeds with all the discretion one might expect from a canon's sister." He turned and surveyed the room. The old-fashioned writing desk, the cracked carriage clock stopped at 6:43, the curtains half drawn against the pale June sun. And most of all, the smell, not quite death, not quite lavender, but a thin, waxy odor that seemed to hint at sealed secrets and long-avoided correspondences. "Did she receive letters?" Wimsey asked. The maid blinked. "Only one regular. One, my lord, Thursdays, from a cousin up in Whitby. She always put it straight in the drawer without reading." "Ah," said Wimsey. "A woman of rare discipline. Or perhaps rare dread." He turned back to the empty paper, then to the dagger in her chest, ornate, old, not unlike the ones kept in the vestry for ceremonial nonsense. "Well, Bunter," he said over his shoulder, as the impeccably silent manservant materialized from the hallway, "cancel the pamphlets. It appears the good Miss Tolland has made her final statement without writing a single word. That, in itself, may be the only statement worth noting." And so it began. A murder in a room that bore all the signs of silence, in a house where letters were never written, and among a set of people who, when asked what they knew, would all naturally say nothing at all. Which, as Wimsey would later observe, was always a promising beginning. Lord Peter Wimsey did not stay long in the parlor with the corpse. He had seen enough to satisfy his initial curiosities, and more importantly, to begin the quiet process of putting things into their proper order. Not facts, quite yet, Those were still elusive, but the suggestive little disorderings of habit and intention, which he considered vastly more telling. People, he often said, lied not with their words, but with their teaspoons. Miss Tolland's parlor, for instance, was not one in which death was meant to arrive. It was neatly kept, though not obsessively so. The rug was slightly skewed, the curtains drawn at an uneven height, and the ashtray on the small table bore evidence of someone smoking with a distracted hand, though Miss Tolland, by all accounts, had never smoked in her life. A delicate confusion, a sense of the habitual order being not disturbed but paused, suggested something both sudden and careful. He turned to Bunter as they stepped into the corridor. The maid, Bunter? Name of Elsie, my lord. Local girl. Came into service here just under a year ago. Respectable parents. No record of misdemeanor, public or private. I hope not. Her knees were trembling like a Victorian souffle. I do not think she is our murderess, though it is always possible she has poisoned someone's blancmange in the past. Bunter did not smile. He never did when murder was about. Whimsy found Elsie in the modest servants' hall, where she was being offered a cup of tea by the cook, who was doing her best to remain within earshot of everything while appearing entirely occupied with shortbread. Miss Elsie, Whimsy said gently, sitting in a Windsor chair with the sort of grace that seemed designed to shame lesser men into adjusting their trousers. You say Miss Tolland never wrote letters? No, my lord, never. She always said correspondence was for women with nothing worth saying out loud. A stern philosophy. Did she ever receive any other mail, anything out of the ordinary? Parcels? Papers? Anonymous notes suggesting her cat would be the next to die? Elsie blinked. Only from Miss Temple, her cousin in Whitby. Thursday mornings, regular as the clock. The clock that no longer ticks? Elsie paled slightly. Yes, my lord. That one. It's been temperamental since Christmas. And the letters from Miss Temple, Miss Tolland, never read them? Not that I ever saw, sir. She'd take it, sniff like it was gone sour, and put it in the desk drawer. Which drawer? The top left, sir. She locked it, usually. But not this morning? Elsie hesitated. No, not today. I unlocked it for the police. Indeed, said Whimsy. And was the letter there? No, my lord. Curious. Today is Thursday. He stood with no particular haste and glanced at the cook. Your name, madam? Mrs. Brackett, my lord. I've been with Miss Tolland for nigh on 15 years. And in all that time, has she ever sat down to write a letter? No, my lord. Not even to her solicitor. If she had a quarrel, she settled it face to face. Wouldn't even allow greeting cards in the house called. Them vulgar bribes for social debt. And what about visitors? Friends, gentlemen callers, a shadowy figure with a cloak and a limp. Mrs. Brackett pursed her lips. Only the vicar came regular, Mr. Cattermole, but he hasn't been in since Easter. Had a falling out about the altar cloths. Ah, ecclesiastical. Linen's always a dangerous business. And the gardener? That'd be Mr. Purkis. Lives down the lane. Comes Tuesdays and Fridays. And today is Thursday. Then I presume he was not here this morning? No, sir. Not that. I saw. Whimsy nodded, thanked them both with unfeigned charm, and returned to the study where the local inspector, an aging man with a mustache as stiff as his opinions, was attempting to direct a constable to dust for fingerprints on the brass. Letter opener stand. Inspector Carruthers, said Whimsy mildly. You'll find no prints of value on that, I fear. Miss Tolland believed in dusting compulsively and reading not at all. I suspect the letter opener was more ceremonial than practical. But tell me, has the post been accounted for? Carruthers turned, irritation flickering. You mean the morning delivery? Precisely. I've spoken with young Freddie. From the post office. He delivered a single envelope through the slot around 8:30. Says he remembers it because the vicar's dog was barking again, and Miss Tolland usually banged the glass to quiet him. This morning she didn't. And the envelope? Gone, not among the effects. Then we may safely surmise that whatever was in that envelope was either burned, stolen, or used to provoke someone into a most ungentlemanly act of punctuation. Carruthers grunted. Could have been the killer who brought it. Yes, and then posted it to arrive the next morning as an elaborate prank. But unless our killer is also employed by His Majesty's Royal Mail, I doubt it. Whimsy turned to the writing desk again. He had avoided touching it before, partly out of respect and partly because the tableau had seemed too deliberate. Now gloved, he slid open the drawers with the cautious reverence of a man inspecting a trap. No letters. No stationery worth noting, only a faded blotter, an empty inkwell, and a thin silver stylus expensively made and quite dry. The sort of instrument that might leave faint impressions if one tried to write with it out of force of habit, or absent-mindedness, or under duress. He lifted the blotter and held it to the light. There were faint indentations, visible only at an angle. Not enough for legibility, but enough to confirm that something had been attempted. A sentence begun, or more intriguingly, never begun at all. The clock on the mantel had stopped at 6:43. There was no other timepiece in the room. "Bunter," he said softly, "let us take a short walk to the post office. I should like to know precisely when the morning post was sorted, and who else might have received letters from Whitby. And the coroner's estimate of time of death?" Carruthers called after him. "Ah, but that's the delightful ambiguity, isn't it?" Whimsy replied cheerfully, stepping out into the hall. "Our doctor, in his eagerness to declare a fine death, has given us a range from 6:30 to 9, which is to say, he has told us nothing useful at all. But the post, Inspector, the post is marvelously punctual." The Fenchurch Dallas post office was no more than a red brick stub of a building with a bell that rang every time one stepped across the threshold, even if one tried not to. It was manned, though the word seemed excessive, by a Mr. Tubb who had been clerk, gossip, and half-satirist of village affairs for nearly 30 years. "Lord Whimsy, is it? Been a while since we had a peer through the door. What can I do for you? Looking for stamps or information?" "Information, if you please, Mr. Tubb. Can you tell me what letters were posted to Miss Agatha Tolland this morning? And whether any came from Whitby?" Tubb squinted at the ledger, then drew his finger down the columns. "Only the one, sir. Marked with a Whitby postmark, yes, same as every Thursday. Arrived just before 8. Young Freddie took it, round with the rest. At 1:30. No return address? Just T. Temple, handwritten. Bit of a spidery scrawl, same as always. And no other letters for Miss Tolland in the last week?" "None. She was a woman of remarkable restraint." Whimsy thanked him and turned to go. But as he opened the door, a woman brushing past him to enter paused mid-step, her eyes wide. Oh goodness, it's her, isn't it? Agatha Tolland? I've just heard. They said someone said she'd, but she can't have written anything, surely?" Whimsy turned, interested. "And why should that surprise you, miss?" "Cleve, Nora Cleve. I live up the hill 3 doors down. Everyone knows Agatha never wrote letters. Said it opened the door to gossip, but I suppose, perhaps, she finally had something worth saying." "Indeed," said Whimsy quietly. "Or perhaps someone else thought she did and killed her before she said it." Nora Cleve's eyes flickered nervously towards the street, where the late spring sunshine painted patches of gold on the cobbled stones. Whimsy noted the slight tremor in her voice, the way she folded her hands one over the other, as though seeking comfort in the familiar gesture of restraint. "Miss Cleve," Whimsy began with deliberate gentleness, "you seem to know Miss Tolland." "Well, only in passing, my lord. But everyone in Fenchurch Dallas knows everyone else's habits, or lack thereof. Agatha was different, quiet, proud, never a word more than was necessary, and even then, carefully measured. A lady of peculiar principles, I understand. She refused to write letters, yes." Even when the vicar had that fuss with the altar cloths, she went in person to settle the matter. No letters, no fuss. But, she glanced about, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, there were rumors, quiet ones, mind, that she was keeping secrets, that she was expecting news, something troubling. Troubling news from Whitby, perhaps. Nora bit her lip. I wouldn't know. But the last Thursday, last week, she was said to be particularly restless. Took walks after dark, sat by the window, staring out at the churchyard. Whimsy made a note to himself. Restlessness was rarely a harmless condition. Tell me, Miss Cleeve, did Miss Tolland have any visitors apart from the vicar? Friends or relatives who came calling unexpectedly? Nora hesitated, as if weighing the propriety of her answer. There was a gentleman, a Mr. Edwin Farnham. He was here twice this week. Quiet fellow, not from these parts. Said he was an antiquarian, interested in the local church records. An antiquarian? Whimsy repeated, arching an eyebrow. Always a useful disguise. Did Miss Tolland welcome him? She did, though with her usual reserve. I don't think she trusted him entirely. The housekeeper mentioned his hands trembled when he held the silver candlesticks. A nervous collector, perhaps. Or someone with more to hide, Nora suggested. The servants were uneasy around him. Miss Tolland herself seemed troubled. After his visits, Whimsy made a mental note to question Mr. Farnham without delay. The plot thickened, as it so often did, with the introduction of a man with motives concealed behind a scholarly veneer. Returning to the manor, Whimsy found Inspector Carruthers attempting to organize the household staff for separate interviews, his efforts hampered by the subtle chaos of grief and gossip. The cook was muttering about missed meals, and the gardener was fussing over a broken pruning shears, the source of his supposed storm injury last Tuesday. Inspector, Whimsy began, I would like to speak with the gardener, Mr. Purkis. I have some questions regarding his whereabouts and, if you please, his version of last week's thunderstorm. Carruthers nodded, motioning a constable to fetch the man. Mr. Purkis arrived shortly, his hands dirt-streaked, his weather-beaten face showing signs of recent anxiety. Mr. Purkis, you say you were not present this morning? No, sir. Not till after 9. I was down by the walled garden. Is that consistent with your usual Thursday routine? Not quite. I usually come Fridays and Tuesdays, but Miss Tolland asked me to check the garden earlier this week, so I came Thursday this time. And the storm on Tuesday? Oh yes, it was a bit sudden, sir. Thunder rolled in, lights flickered in the village. I was caught outside and got a scratch on my arm when a branch fell. Was anyone else about during that storm? Any visitors? Or suspicious persons? Purkis looked puzzled. No one I saw, sir. The village folk tend to keep indoors when the weather turns foul. Whimsy regarded him thoughtfully. And the church bells? Did they ring during the storm? The bells? I don't think so, sir. It's rare they ring in bad weather. The ringers are cautious. Indeed. Yet the clock in Miss Tolland's parlor stopped at 6:43. Was the thunderstorm around then? Closer to mid-afternoon, sir. 3 or 4 o'clock. Then the clock stopping is unrelated to the storm. Purkis shrugged. Seems so. With a polite nod, Whimsy dismissed the gardener, filing away these details for later. Back in the manor's drawing room, the household assembled as requested. The vicar, Mr. Cattermole, appeared particularly pale. His usually confident demeanor diminished. Mr. Cattermole, Whimsy said, you have not been here since Easter. I gather you and Miss Tolland had some dispute regarding the altar cloths? The vicar's lips twitched. A trifling disagreement, Lord Whimsy. Nothing of consequence, but enough to curtail your visits? I suppose. Agatha is a proud woman. She took affront easily, and the churchwarden sided with her on some points. Did you see her last week? Only briefly. She was absorbed in something, papers perhaps. She seemed anxious. Anxiety is an excellent motive for correspondence, is it not? Cattermole cleared his throat. Indeed, but Miss Tolland was secretive. She refused to discuss her affairs. Secrets, then. Did she share them with anyone? The cousin from Whitby? The gentleman, Mr. Farnham? I do not know of Mr. Farnham's visits. They were not made public knowledge. Whimsy made a mental note to press Mr. Farnham on his timing and purpose. Before he could continue, the housekeeper entered with a small brass key on a chain. "This was found among Miss Tolland's things, Lord Whimsy," she said. "I believe it belongs to the desk drawer she locked." "Thank you, Mrs. Aldrich." Whimsy took the key, turning it over in his gloved hand. A key to secrets. Let us see what treasures it unlocks. Returning to the parlor, Whimsy gently opened the drawer that had been previously examined. This time, with the key in place, it yielded a small packet wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was a bundle of letters, several sealed and one half opened, addressed in the same spidery handwriting as the Whitby envelope. The open letter bore no date but began, "Dearest Agatha, I write with a heavy heart and an urgent plea for discretion. The matter we discussed cannot remain hidden much longer." Whimsy carefully read the fragment aloud, then folded the letter back. "Secrets indeed," he murmured. "And perhaps the motive for murder lies not in the refusal to write letters, but in what was finally written and almost sent." The household, watching from the doorway, exchanged nervous glances. Who might have wanted to prevent Miss Tolland from sending that letter? Whimsy mused aloud. And what consequences might the revelation carry? A sudden noise from the hall interrupted the moment. A sharp cough, hesitant footsteps. A man entered, tall, slight, with restless eyes and hands that betrayed some nervous tremor. "Mr. Edwin Farnham, Lord Whimsy," Farnham said, bowing slightly. "I understand you wish to speak with me. I fear my timing has been unfortunate. Mr. Farnham, your visits to Miss Tolland have drawn some attention. I trust you will forgive my intrusion, but—" "I understand completely," Farnham interrupted, voice steady. "Agatha was a dear friend, though I fear my presence caused her distress. Indeed. Perhaps you will help us understand the nature of your relationship and the urgency of your visits." Farnham sighed, glancing at the gathering crowd. "I sought her aid in deciphering some old church records. But there was more a family matter, one that Agatha knew but I did not. A matter that might shake the very foundations of our little village." Whimsy's interest piqued. "Pray, continue." Farnham hesitated, then spoke slowly. "There's a question of inheritance of lineage. I believed my family's claim to the estate was settled, but documents recently discovered suggest otherwise. Agatha possessed letters and papers that could confirm or deny my rights. She was cautious, understandably so, but she agreed to help me find the truth, which you feared might not serve your interests." "Precisely. It was a delicate balance, and I feared the revelation might unsettle more than property. It might unsettle reputations, friendships, even lives." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Farnham, did you visit Miss Tolland on the morning of her death?" "I did. We met briefly. She was anxious but resolute. I left before 8. And the letter from Whitby?" "An old friend of hers, Miss Temple. Agatha showed me a letter she had received that very morning. I did not see its contents." "And what of the letter you hoped she would send?" Farnham's face grew pale. "I know of it, Lord Whimsy. A letter that might change everything. I feared it too." Whimsy regarded the man silently. The trembling hands, the guarded tone, the carefully chosen words. All signs, perhaps, not of innocence, but of a man caught in a web far too intricate for mere property disputes. As the afternoon wore on, Whimsy's mind pieced together the threads, timelines, motives, half-spoken fears. Agatha Tolland had been a woman of principle and secrecy. Her silence now tragically broken by a letter never sent and a murder that demanded an answer. The key to that answer, Whimsy was certain, lay not in the visible, but in the invisible, the empty spaces between words, the ticking of a stopped clock. and the steady march of time that, for all its constancy, could be so cruelly manipulated. And as dusk fell on Fenchurch Dallas, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to delve deeper into the shadows that concealed a truth more unsettling than any whispered legend of the village churchyard. The fading light of evening cast long shadows across the parlor as Wimsey settled himself. In a chair near the window, the gathered household dispersing reluctantly to their quarters with whispers and uneasy glances. The locked drawer's contents had opened a new vista of complexity, and though the letters spoke only in half-formed fragments, they hinted at an unfolding tragedy not of passion alone, but of inheritance, secrecy, and psychological restraint. Wimsey, as ever, found clarity in the minutiae, and it was the minutiae that first drew his attention that evening. The curious discordance between timepieces throughout the house. The grandfather clock in the hall had been wound only until 7 o'clock the previous night, yet the parlor clock frozen at 6:43 suggested a moment arrested. Quite literally, at the instant of the crime, he rose and moved across the room to the mantelpiece where the parlor clock sat. Its face was quaint, the hands delicately fashioned in gilt filigree, but it had stopped dead. A trivial thing, perhaps, but in the calculus of murder it might be the most telling clue. "Mrs. Aldrich," Wimsey called softly as the housekeeper appeared at the doorway. "You mentioned the clock was stopped when you arrived?" "Yes, my lord. I noticed it was not ticking when I came in this morning. I assumed it had wound down." "And the hall clock?" "Still running, my lord. I suppose it must have been wound the night before." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "Did you notice any sounds during the night? Bells ringing, doors opening?" Mrs. Aldrich's face tightened. "Only the church bell, my lord. It tolled thrice, as it does at midnight, and again at 6 in the morning. Other than that, nothing unusual. Yet the storm, as Mr. Purkis remarked, was at 3 or 4. "Yes, quite." The discrepancy intrigued Wimsey. A stopped clock, a wound hall clock, the absence of sound from the bells at the crucial hour, details apparently trivial, but significant in the delicate weave of evidence. Turning from the clock, Wimsey's gaze fell to the window, slightly ajar despite the chill. A cool breeze fluttered the edge of the lace curtain, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and wood smoke from distant chimneys. He noted the faint scuff marks on the sill, as though something heavy had rested there or been used as support. He closed the window, locking it firmly. "Miss Cleeve mentioned Miss Tolland sat by this window often in the evenings?" "Yes, my lord, especially in the last week. She seemed preoccupied with something, watching the churchyard. Curious that she would seek the solace of that view when secrets might be best kept indoors." Wimsey's thoughts turned to Mr. Farnham. The man's nervous tremors and half-spoken fears hinted at more than scholarly curiosity. He must be questioned further. Summoning Inspector Carruthers, Wimsey requested the presence of Mr. Farnham for a more detailed interview. The inspector, grateful for any guidance, arranged for the man to be brought to the drawing-room once more. As Farnham entered, Wimsey noted a subtle change. The man's eyes, once evasive, now held a flicker of resolve. "Mr. Farnham," Wimsey began, "I wish to clarify some points regarding your recent visits and your relationship with Miss Tolland. The matter of inheritance you mentioned is, I suspect, central to the events that have transpired." Farnham nodded. "I fear it is. Would you be so kind as to provide a timeline of your movements last Tuesday, the day of Miss Tolland's death?" "Certainly. I arrived at Fenchurch Dallas at precisely 7:15 in the morning, by train from Whitby. I called upon Miss Tolland at 7:45 and stayed until 7:58, when I left to catch the 8:10 train back." "Did you have any meetings or visits after returning to Whitby?" "None. I spent the remainder of the day at the library, researching parish records." "And you observed no one else at the manor that morning besides Miss Tolland?" "Only the servants and, briefly, the gardener, who passed by while I was with Agatha." Wimsey's mind ticked over the details. The gardener's presence at the walled garden, the stopped clock, and the brief meeting between Farnham and Tolland all converged to create a fragile timeline, one that might yet conceal a gap. Mr. Farnham, Whimsy said gently, did you notice the clock in the parlor? The one on the mantelpiece? I did not pay it much attention, nor did I until now. It stopped at 6:43. Farnham's eyes widened. That is peculiar. I was not here then, indeed. But it might be worth considering that the clock stopped the moment Miss Tolland was attacked, or at least when something disrupted the usual order. Farnham swallowed hard. Is there anything else you wish to tell me, Mr. Farnham? The man hesitated, then spoke. There is one thing. A letter. I hoped she would send a letter I urged her to write. It concerned the legitimacy of my claim to the estate. I feared the truth might unravel much more than just my inheritance. An admission of guilt? No, merely a confession of uncertainty. I wanted her to clarify once and for all before the matter became public. And you believe this letter might have sealed her fate? Farnham nodded grimly. As Farnham left, Whimsy's attention turned to the servants once more, particularly to Mrs. Aldridge, who had been overseeing the household with an iron hand since the tragedy. Mrs. Aldridge, you have been here many years? Almost 20, my lord. Loyalty is admirable. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the household's conduct? Strange visitors, unexplained noises, quarrels? Mrs. Aldridge pursed her lips. Only what one might expect in a house mourning its mistress. But the new gardener, Mr. Purkis, is a peculiar man. He keeps to himself, and I have caught him talking to himself in the garden. An odd habit indeed. And the footman, Charles, has been jittery. He says he heard voices in the night, but none of us saw anything. Whimsy considered these remarks carefully. The house was a stage upon which many dramas unfolded, some hidden behind whispered conversations, and others in silences far more telling. That night, as the manor fell into a restless quiet, Whimsy returned to the parlor alone. He examined the letters again, looking for a pattern, a hint, a key. One phrase caught his eye in the open letter. The matter we discussed cannot remain hidden much longer. Who was we? What was the matter? And why had Miss Tolland been so anxious to keep it secret? The ticking of the hall clock was steady, the parlor clock's silence a constant reminder of the broken moment. Whimsy's eyes drifted to the window once more. Outside, the churchyard lay bathed in moonlight, the shadows cast by ancient yews seeming to hold their breath. It was here, he decided, that the next step must begin. With a firm resolve, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to walk the boundary between the living and the dead, between reason and superstition, to uncover the truth that lurked beneath the surface of Fenchurch Dallas. For in the quiet heart of this country village, where civility masked desire and deception, the lady who never wrote letters had finally been silenced. But her silence would speak volumes, if only one knew how to listen. The morning mist still clung to the hedgerows when Whimsy set out from Fenchurch Dallas Manor, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path as he made for the churchyard. There was a subtle urgency in the cool, damp air, as if the village itself awaited his next move. The previous evening's reflections had sharpened his focus. The letters, the stopped clock, the uneasy servants all converged into a knot that required untangling in the silent spaces where words faltered. As he crossed the low stone wall into the churchyard, Whimsy noted the weathered gravestones leaning against one another like old conspirators, moss-covered and half-forgotten. The same yews cast their spidery shadows under the waking sun, their presence more than decorative, a reminder of the village's long history and the secrets buried beneath. His attention was drawn to a small, almost hidden niche near the west wall, a narrow alcove where the air seemed cooler and the ground less trodden. Kneeling, Whimsy examined the earth, disturbed recently, and traced a pattern of faint impressions in the soft soil. Footprints, barely perceptible, led to and from the alcove, yet curiously, no one had mentioned this before. The discovery suggested someone had concealed or perhaps retrieved something here in the days before Miss Tolland's death. Whimsy stood, surveying the churchyard gates from a new angle. The gate's latch was intricately wrought, but unlatched that morning. A detail easily overlooked, but now suspect. Returning to the manor, Whimsy's thoughts turned to the household, and the seemingly trivial yet insistently out-of-place detail he had not yet fully probed. The clock stopping at 6:43, Mrs. Aldridge, summoned once again, was forthcoming. It was the parlor clock, my lord, yes. The clock that never kept perfect time, always a bit slow or fast, as if it had a mind of its own. A clock with a mind or with a motive, Mrs. Aldridge. Might it have stopped by mechanical failure, or was it deliberately halted? Mrs. Aldridge raised a perfectly arched brow. Deliberate, I think, my lord. Miss Tolland was careful with her belongings, and the clock had been wound just the day before. It wouldn't stop without cause. A cause, indeed. Did anyone else have access to the parlor overnight? The servants were all in their quarters, and the doors locked, except for the housekeeper and the gardener. Mr. Purkis? Yes, he often works late in the gardens. The parlor overlooks the walled garden. This reminded Whimsy of the gardener's strange habit of talking to himself. He resolved to revisit that conversation with Purkis. Meanwhile, the vicar, Mr. Cattermole, was waiting, his countenance shadowed by a mixture of grief and apprehension. Lord Whimsy, he said quietly, I confess I have been hesitant to speak freely, but there is something you must know about Agatha. Whimsy inclined his head. I encourage candor, Reverend. The altar cloth dispute was more than it seemed. Agatha was guarding a secret that touched the church's foundation. She believed the parish's lineage was intertwined with a dark history, one that might sully reputations if revealed. A family scandal, then. More a matter of lost trust, and perhaps a hidden betrayal. Agatha feared this secret could fracture the community. And you, Reverend, were privy to these fears? To some extent. She confided in me but asked for discretion. There was a letter she wished never to be read aloud, sealed away. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. The very letter, perhaps, that remains unsigned and unsent. Indeed. The revelation added a new shade to the tapestry, one of social fragility and veiled guilt. Later that afternoon, the gardener, Mr. Purkis, was summoned again. Mr. Purkis, Whimsy began, I understand you have a habit of speaking aloud to yourself? Purkis flushed. I suppose it helps me think, sir. I've had a hard life, you see. Not much company besides the plants. Hardship often makes companions of shadows. Did you notice anything unusual the night Miss Tolland died? Purkis looked away, hands wringing. There was a light in the parlor window late that night, much later than usual. A light? Yes, Miss Tolland often kept a lamp burning. But this night, it flickered strangely, like a signal. A signal? Purkis nodded. I thought I heard voices, whispers. But I couldn't see anyone. Did you investigate? No, sir. I was too far, and the garden shadows play tricks. Whimsy made note. A flickering light and whispered voices late at night. A conversation perhaps interrupted or overheard. He next sought out Charles, the footman, whose jitteriness had been remarked upon. Charles, Whimsy said, you mentioned hearing voices? The young man nodded, eyes darting nervously. Yes, my lord. I was passing the parlor corridor late and thought I heard a woman's voice, low and urgent. Then a scuffle and silence. Did you see who it was? No, sir, I froze. Then I heard footsteps rushing away. Whimsy allowed himself a faint smile, recalling how often the smallest observations revealed the greatest truths. The convergence of these details, the unexplained voices, the stopped clock, the disturbed soil in the churchyard, and the letter, from Whitby formed a mosaic that pointed towards one conclusion. The crime was no simple act of passion or inheritance dispute. but a carefully orchestrated act of concealment. Whimsy returned once more to the letters, poring over the careful script for anything overlooked. One phrase leapt out suddenly. "The matter we discussed cannot remain hidden much longer. Who is we?" He muttered. It was time to confront the elusive second identity, hidden behind the village's veil of civility. As dusk approached, Whimsy called together the household. The garden, the clock, the letters, and the voices all hinted at a double life, someone living between light and shadow. And as the gathering dark deepened around Fenchurch Dallas, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to unravel the final threads, bearing in mind that in a place where letters were never written, silence spoke most eloquently. Lord Peter Wimsey returned to the Manor's dimly lit study, where the faint scent of old paper and fading ink clung to the air like a relic of a forgotten age. The clues, like so many scattered leaves, fluttered uneasily in the autumnal draft of his mind. The threads of the mystery, each seemingly disparate stopped clocks, whispered voices, the garden's shadows, and the enigmatic letters began to gather into a pattern only visible when viewed from just the right angle. He felt that he stood at the edge of a precipice, where the solid ground of certainty gave way to the fog of half-truths and concealed motives. He settled into the leather-backed chair, letting his eyes rest momentarily on the stacks of letters he had found in the locked drawer. The pale handwriting was neat and deliberate, but frustratingly incomplete. The letter fragment addressed to Mr. Farnham suggested a relationship burdened by secrets and unspoken demands. Yet the most compelling detail was the phrase that haunted him: "The matter we discussed cannot remain hidden much longer." That cryptic sentence demanded illumination, and Whimsy knew that to unravel it, he must return to the victim's concealed past. The next morning, having dispatched a terse note to Inspector Carruthers requesting the earliest opportunity for a private meeting, Whimsy set out once again for Whitby. The seaside town, with its bracing air and windswept piers, seemed a world apart from the cloistered life of Fenchurch Dallas. Yet here lay the missing pieces of the puzzle. He was determined to uncover what double life Agatha Tolland might have led, what psychological entanglements bound her and Farnham, and whether the tangled web of inheritance might be the true motive behind her death. Arriving at the local library, Whimsy was greeted by Miss Gwendolen Reed, the librarian and keeper of records. Her austere features softened with recognition and a faint hint of respect. "Lord Whimsy," she said, "you've come about the parish records, no doubt." "Yes, Miss Reed. I trust you can assist me with the documents concerning the Tolland estate and any associated legal papers." She nodded and led him through the musty stacks to a private reading room. There, between volumes of dusty ledgers and faded newspapers, Whimsy began his meticulous search. Minutes turned to hours as he sifted through probate records, letters of administration, and family correspondences. One document, in particular, caught his eye: a codicil to the Tolland will, dated some 6 years prior, signed but conspicuously absent the witness, signature that would have rendered it legally binding. The codicil amended the distribution of the estate in favor of a previously unmentioned beneficiary, a Miss Evelina Harcourt, described as a distant cousin. The document was drafted in the victim's own hand, yet no one in the village seemed to have heard of Miss Harcourt. This revelation intrigued Whimsy greatly. If the codicil were genuine, it provided a motive of inheritance manipulation. If forged or concealed, it suggested deception at the heart of the family. Turning to the newspapers, Whimsy uncovered a series of small notices regarding an Evelina Harcourt residing briefly in Whitby some years ago. The woman had disappeared from public record shortly after a scandal involving a local gentleman of note. Whether this was coincidence or deliberate obfuscation was a question Whimsy intended to pursue. Returning to Fenchurch Dallas late that afternoon, Whimsy requested a further interview with Inspector Carruthers. "Inspector," Whimsy began quietly, "I have uncovered evidence suggesting that Miss Tolland's life was far more complex than we first imagined. There is mention of a Miss Evelina Harcourt, a figure unknown to the household but crucial to the estate's fate. Carruthers raised a skeptical brow. Could this be a red herring, my lord? Possibly. But given the inconsistencies in the will, the missing letters, and the timing of Miss Tolland's death, I suspect it is a thread worth pulling. They agreed to visit the local solicitor who had handled the estate's affairs at the solicitor's office, a modest room smelling faintly of leather and ink. Mr. James Harding greeted them with professional civility. Yes, yes, he said. Referring to a thick file, Miss Tolland did amend her will, though the codicil was never formalized due to a dispute over witnesses. The beneficiary named, Evelina Harcourt, was a distant relative, though Miss Tolland's intentions were clear. Was there a known relationship between Miss Tolland and Miss Harcourt? Whimsy asked. Records are sparse, but correspondence hints at a close connection, perhaps even one of guardianship or protection. And what of the scandal you mentioned? Harding hesitated, lowering his voice. Rumor had it that Miss Harcourt was involved in a rather public and disgraceful affair, which led to her sudden disappearance. Whimsy's mind raced. Could Miss Harcourt's return to Fenchurch Dallas, or knowledge of her existence, have precipitated the fatal events? Back at the manor, Whimsy convened the household once more, gathering servants and family alike in the dim drawing room, shadows flickering from the firelight. Ladies and gentlemen, Whimsy began, we are no longer dealing with a straightforward case of inheritance or passion. The victim, Miss Tolland, concealed a secret identity, a double life, if you will, connected to a Miss Evelina Harcourt. Murmurs rippled through the room. She intended to alter her will in Miss Harcourt's favor, but legal obstacles and social scandal prevented its finalization. This revelation provides a powerful motive for those who stood to lose from such a change. Whimsy paused, eyes sweeping the assembly. I believe that understanding this double life is key to unveiling the true circumstances of Miss Tolland's death. The psychological burden she carried and the fear of exposure may well have led to desperate measures. Mrs. Aldridge, the ever-watchful housekeeper, spoke hesitantly. Miss Tolland was always careful to keep her affairs private. We knew. She suffered much but never guessed the full extent. Inspector Carruthers nodded gravely. This new information demands a re-examination of the suspect's alibis and motives. Whimsy, eyes glinting with the thrill of approaching resolution, concluded. Our next steps must be to locate any remaining correspondence between Miss Tolland and Miss Harcourt, and to question those who might have known of their relationship. As the fire sputtered low and the night deepened outside, Whimsy allowed himself a rare smile. The twisted strands of the case were beginning to unravel, revealing the psychological complexity beneath the polished veneer of Fenchurch Dallas. He knew well that the darkest secrets often hide in plain sight, and it was only a matter of time before the final act would unfold. And the true murderer, weighed down by guilt and desperation, would be exposed. The chill of early evening crept through the high windows of Fenchurch Dallas Manor as Lord Peter Whimsy settled into a somber contemplation by the study fire. The revelations of the previous day's hidden codicils, shadowy relatives, whispered secrets had shifted the terrain of his investigation from the merely curious to the deeply personal. Agatha Tolland's life, once seemingly a straightforward narrative of genteel solitude, now revealed itself as a labyrinth of duplicity and concealed pain. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. It was Bunter, his ever-reliable manservant, entering with a discreet air of urgency. My lord, a visitor arrived this afternoon. She identifies herself as Miss Evelina Harcourt. Whimsy's eyes lit with interest. How fortuitous. Admit her at once. Moments later, a woman stepped into the room. She was of slender build, her features refined but touched with an air of weariness, eyes bright, but shadowed with past burdens. Her voice was steady, though laced with a subtle tremor. Of apprehension, Lord Whimsy, thank you for receiving me. I fear my arrival may complicate matters. but I come to set some truths to rest." Whimsy gestured toward a chair. "Miss Harcourt, your timing is impeccable. Please sit. Your name has emerged frequently in my recent inquiries." She nodded, folding her hands tightly. "Agatha was my cousin, though our lives diverged sharply. I lived away, hiding from scandal that could have destroyed us both." He regarded her thoughtfully. "Scandal, you say?" "The solicitor's office hinted at such, but I seek the precise nature and its bearing on the present tragedy." Miss Harcourt's gaze fell. "It was a liaison deemed improper by our society, a relationship that, once exposed, forced me to vanish. Agatha was my confidante, my protector, but also a prisoner of her own fears." Whimsy leaned forward. "And the codicil? To the will the attempt to secure your inheritance." She sighed. "Agatha wished to provide me a chance at reclaiming a life lost to whispers and exile. But the document was incomplete, caught between legal technicalities and social prudence." "Did anyone else know of this?" Whimsy asked, keen to test the extent of concealment. "Only a handful. Agatha's closest servants, the vicar, and—" she hesitated, "a man named Farnham." The name caused Whimsy to stiffen imperceptibly. "Mr. Farnham, the gentleman mentioned in the letters?" "Indeed. He was once engaged to Agatha, though their relationship was fraught with conflict." Whimsy's mind raced to the letters, veiled references, and the silent conversations overheard in the manor's corridors. Farnham's motives suddenly appeared tangled in a web of jealousy, betrayal, and wounded pride. Miss Harcourt continued. "Farnham was possessive and volatile. Agatha's refusal to marry him led to bitterness that did not easily fade." The detective's eyes narrowed. "You suspect his involvement in her death?" She looked away, conflicted. "I do not know what transpired that night, but I feared his presence was dangerous." Whimsy decided it was time to confront the man himself. The following morning, Farnham was summoned to the manor. His entrance was marked by a studied calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He was a man of imposing stature, with a clipped manner and a faint scar tracing his jawline, an imprint of a temper not entirely subdued. "Mr. Farnham," Whimsy began with measured politeness, "you were once engaged to Miss Tolland, were you not?" Farnham's lips tightened. "Yes, that engagement was broken off some years ago." "Would you care to explain the circumstances?" "There is little to explain, my lord. Miss Tolland was capricious. Our differences grew too great." "And yet," Whimsy pressed, "you maintained correspondence, it seems." "Merely polite exchanges, nothing more. Is that so?" "Then perhaps you can explain this." Whimsy produced one of the unsent letters, a letter containing threats veiled in concern, imploring Miss Tolland to reconsider her intentions. Farnham's face hardened. "That letter was written—" "In anger, yes, but I deny any involvement in her death." Whimsy's tone sharpened slightly, though his smile remained courteous. "We shall see, Mr. Farnham, but your alibi for the night in question is somewhat tenuous." Farnham stiffened. "I was attending a gathering in Whitby. Several witnesses can confirm." Whimsy made a note to verify this claim, but sensed evasiveness in Farnham's demeanor. After Farnham's departure, Whimsy summoned Mrs. Aldridge once more. "Did you notice any signs of conflict between Miss Tolland and Mr. Farnham recently?" Mrs. Aldridge nodded slowly. "Yes, my lord. There was a stormy argument not long before her death. I heard raised voices through the kitchen doorwards, sharp enough to chill the blood." "Did you recognize the voices clearly?" "Miss Tolland's, certainly, and Mr. Farnham's." "And did anyone else see them?" "No, sir. They met in the garden late that evening." Whimsy's mind replayed the gardener's admission of strange lights and whispered voices in the walled garden. Double quotes Mrs. Aldridge. "Would you say the garden gate was locked that night?" She frowned. "I'm not certain, my lord. The gates are usually secured by Purkis." This prompted Whimsy to seek out the gardener again. "Mr. Purkis," he said quietly, I understand you tend the garden with great care. Were you present when Mr. Farnham and Miss Tollan met in the garden?" Purkis looked uneasy. "I was nearby tending the lower beds. I heard voices, yes, but I did not see anyone." "Was the garden gate locked when you arrived?" Purkis hesitated. "I thought so, but now that you mention it, I recall the latch was loose, as if someone had forced it." The loose latch, the scuffle heard by the footman, the stopped clock, all these details wove a tighter noose around Farnham's alibi. Whimsy's thoughts turned to the silent salver, the one missing from the sideboard in the parlor, and to the peculiar smell noted by the maid, a faint trace of almonds, subtle yet unmistakable. He considered the possibility of poison, and with it, the need for a precise timeline of events. He reviewed the servants' testimonies once more, probing for discrepancies. The footman's account of footsteps rushing away, the gardener's vague observations, Mrs. Aldridge's hearsay of the argument, all formed a fractal of truth, obscured by layers of fear and loyalty. Whimsy resolved to reconstruct the night, meticulously dot with a small group including Carruthers, Mrs. Aldridge, and Purkis. He staged a silent walkthrough of the manor's key locations, the parlor, the garden gate, and the adjoining corridors. He paid close attention to the acoustics and shadows. Standing in the parlor, Whimsy noted the position of the clock, the angle of the lamplight, and the faint residue of candle wax on the windowsill. "This room," he said softly, "was a theater of secrets." The clock stopped at 6:43. "That moment is crucial," Mrs. Aldridge whispered. "That's about the time I heard the scuffle." Whimsy nodded. "Precisely." He moved toward the garden gate. The latch here was tampered with. Someone wanted access or egress unnoticed. Purkis, nervously fingering his sleeves, muttered, "That's true." Whimsy's eyes gleamed. "And the voices you heard, Purkis, what did they say?" "I caught a fragment. Something about, 'It must never be known.' Then we are dealing with more than a quarrel. There is fear of discovery." Returning to the manor, Whimsy ordered a careful search of Miss Tollan's personal effects. In a hidden compartment of her writing desk, they found a small bundle of letters correspondence between Agatha and Farnham, some unread and unsigned. One letter stood out. It spoke of a clandestine meeting scheduled for the very night of her death, a meeting meant to finalize an agreement, but with a veiled warning of consequences should betrayal occur. The plot deepened as the house settled into uneasy silence. Whimsy felt the convergence of his deductions near. The facade of the quiet village was cracking, revealing a tale of obsession, duplicity, and a desperate bid to control legacy and reputation. And somewhere within those shadows, the murderer still lingered, masked by polite society but exposed by the relentless logic of Lord Peter Wimsey. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the window of the study, the twilight casting long shadows across the polished wood and fading wallpaper. Outside, the garden lay cloaked in a creeping mist, the same that had shrouded Fenchurch Dallas on the fatal evening. The details collected scattered letters, interrupted conversations, a tampered garden gate, and whispered threats coalesced in his mind like a slowly revealing fresco, its dark corners just beginning to show the faint outlines of a hidden figure. He turned as Bunter entered quietly, carrying a folded parcel tied with a faded ribbon. "A delivery, my lord. Miss Evelina Harcourt sent this with a request that it be handed to you directly." Whimsy took the parcel, sensing its significance. Unwrapping it with deliberate care, he found within a small notebook, its leather cover worn and the pages filled with neat, tightly spaced handwriting. Evelina's script unmistakable. "This, then," Whimsy murmured, "may be the key to the heart of the mystery." Sitting down, he began to read the entries aloud to himself, each word revealing a delicate chronicle of fear, hope, and concealed truths. Evelina's notebook was a confession of sorts detailing her and Agatha's tangled past, the pressures exerted by Mr. Farnham, and most disturbingly, A coded entry referencing the final hour and shadows in the parlor. It was clear that the sisters in secrecy had feared exposure, not merely of their scandalous association, but of a darker secret, one involving coercion and the threat of ruin. Wimsey's thoughts turned sharply to Farnham. His demeanor was defensive, his alibi shaky, and his motives layered in resentment and jealousy. Yet something else gnawed at Wimsey's reason, a subtle dissonance in the testimonies and the positioning of physical evidence. Determined, Wimsey sought out Inspector Carruthers. "Inspector, I believe the time has come to test the alibis with a renewed scrutiny. Our next step is to establish a precise chronology of the evening, accounting for every movement and sound." Carruthers, somewhat skeptical but willing, agreed. The pair summoned all the household staff and any visitors present that night. One by one, they were asked to recount their actions and observations with exactitude. Even the smallest details. The footman, nervous but candid, recalled hearing 2 distinct footsteps on the corridor at 6:40, followed by a door softly closing. The gardener had noticed an unusual light flickering in the parlor window at nearly the same time. Inconsistent with the manor's lighting arrangements. Mrs. Aldridge confirmed the garden gate latch's looseness, but noted that it was uncommon for the gates to be secured early in the evening. She also mentioned a faint almond scent in the parlor, which the maid had previously reported, but dismissed as a mere accident. All these observations, trivial alone, formed a constellation that pointed toward a meticulously planned event, a staged scene intended to mislead. Wimsey's eyes gleamed. The poison, its faint scent, the forced entry, the stopped clock, they are all deliberate diversions. The killer wished us to see the tableau, but not the artist behind it. He turned to Farnham's alibi once more. "Inspector, is it possible to confirm whether Farnham was indeed at the gathering in Whitby for the entirety of the evening?" Carruthers nodded. "Several witnesses at the club assert he arrived late and left early, citing pressing matters." "And how long would it take to reach Fenchurch Dallas from Whitby by car?" "Roughly 20 minutes, given good roads." 20 minutes, Wimsey repeated. Just enough time for Farnham to slip away unnoticed, carry out a deed, and return. The pieces clicked. He next requested a careful search of Farnham's quarters. There, hidden in the lining of his coat, they found a small vial empty save for the faintest residue, and a crumpled note bearing a partial confession. She must pay for the betrayal. Farnham's composed facade shattered under the weight of evidence. Confronted, he faltered, then lashed out with desperate accusations. Yet Wimsey remained unshaken, weaving the facts into an unassailable narrative. He recounted the timeline, the tampered gate allowing covert entry, the scuffle overheard by the footman, the poisoned drink served from the salver, the stopped clock signaling the moment of death. He explained the psychological motives: Farnham's wounded pride, his jealousy of Evelina, his rage at Agatha's independence and secret life. The detective's voice held the faintest trace of pity as he concluded. "Mr. Farnham, your crime is not merely one of passion, but of calculated malice cloaked in gentlemanly appearance." Farnham collapsed, confessing at last. The truth laid bare beneath the cold scrutiny of Lord Peter Wimsey's intellect. As the household breathed a collective sigh of relief, Wimsey allowed himself a moment of reflection. The tragedy was rooted in human frailty, the fear of exposure, the cruelty of rejection, and the desperate grasping for control. Yet beneath the Gothic veneer and eerie shadows, justice had prevailed through logic, observation, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. In the quiet that followed, Lord Peter Wimsey's final thought was as sharp as ever. As Shakespeare might have put it, "All's well that ends well, but only when the truth is not left to haunt the shadows." Lord Peter Wimsey allowed the storm of Farnham's confession to settle in the heavy air of the drawing-room before speaking again. The dim firelight flickered across his composed face, but his eyes retained that familiar glint, the razor-sharp gleam of a mind still turning, still probing the shadows beyond the surface. "Mr. Farnham's admission while a necessary conclusion is but a single thread in a far more intricate tapestry. I intend to recreate the night's events precisely, if you will indulge me." Inspector Carruthers exchanged a glance with the gathered household, whose faces were taut with apprehension. The servants' nervous glances, the widow's stoic composure, none escaped the subtle scrutiny of Lord Peter Dot. It was arranged that at the hour corresponding to Miss Tolland's demise, the principal witnesses and key figures would be present, in the manner replicating their positions and movements as nearly as memory and circumstance allowed. Whimsy, with his customary flourish of wit and dry irony, orchestrated the scene as a maestro would a symphony, each participant playing their part unwittingly in the performance of truth. "The parlor," Whimsy began, "the center of our drama. Note the position of the clock and the play of shadows from the candles. Observe how the lighting may conceal more than it reveals." He then motioned toward the garden gate. "And here, the latch, often overlooked, betrays a subtle but telling disturbance." The footman stepped forward, retracing the footsteps he had heard so vividly. The gardener positioned himself by the lower beds, recreating his prior stance, ears attuned for any noises. Mrs. Aldridge stood near the kitchen door, recalling the argument she had overheard. The moment of the fictive final hour approached, and Whimsy's voice dropped to a low murmur. "Now, gentlemen and ladies, let us consider the sounds." If the voices raised in anger were indeed heard through the kitchen door, what then of the garden gate's condition and the timing of the footsteps? A sudden movement at the window drew Whimsy's sharp gaze. It was the maid, her face pale as she pointed toward the faint outline of the walled garden beyond. Could it be, Whimsy mused, that the garden was not merely the scene of a quarrel, but of a carefully staged diversion? He stepped outside, beckoning the party to follow. Under the bleak glow of the moonlight, he demonstrated how a figure might slip through the shadowed gate, obscure their movements behind the thick hedges, and reach the parlor unseen. The loose latch, he explained, was deliberately manipulated to facilitate covert ingress and egress. Returning inside, Whimsy's tone took on the slightest edge of severity. "Now, consider the salver, missing from the sideboard. It was the vessel for the poisoned drink, a subtle means to a fatal end." He laid out the reconstructed timeline. With precision, Farnham's departure from Whitby in the early evening, his calculated arrival at Fenchurch Dallas, the argument in the garden, the covert entrance through the gate, the administration of poison, and the manipulation of the clock. To mask the true moment of death, the assembled group listened, rapt and silent, as Whimsy wove these disparate elements into a seamless narrative. Farnham's rage, jealousy, and wounded pride, Whimsy concluded, drove him to an act of cold calculation. Yet the greatest irony is that in his attempt to control the narrative, he left the faintest traces that only the patient eye of logic and observation could discern. Carruthers nodded slowly, clearly impressed despite his earlier skepticism. "A remarkable deduction, my lord. It brings clarity where there was confusion." Mrs. Aldridge's lips quivered as she murmured, "I never wished to think ill of Mr. Farnham, but I feared the worst." Whimsy's eyes softened slightly. Fear and guilt are often intertwined in these tragic dramas. It is not merely the act of murder that reveals the human heart, but the motives and miseries beneath. As the household absorbed the weight of his exposition, a faint creak at the door drew attention. Farnham, now in custody but momentarily left unattended, had seized a moment to speak. His voice was bitter, tinged with defiance. "You may think you have unraveled every knot, Lord Whimsy, but secrets die hard. This tale is not yet complete." Whimsy regarded him with a cool, measured glance. "I am always prepared for an encore, Mr. Farnham." The confession hung in the air, a tantalizing whisper of unfinished business. Whimsy resolved to delve deeper into the shadows of Fenchurch Dallas, certain that the final piece of this dark puzzle awaited discovery, hidden in a detail yet unnoticed or dismissed. For now, The night settled once more over the manor, silent, expectant, and watchful. The game was far from over, and Lord Peter Wimsey's keen mind was already poised for the next move. The faint echo of Farnham's parting words lingered in the heavy air, unsettling in their ambiguity. Lord Peter Wimsey, ever the embodiment of calm, allowed a slow smile to curve his lips, a smile not of mirth but of quiet anticipation. Mr. Farnham's belief that he has the final word is charmingly optimistic. He murmured, eyes scanning the gathered company, each face a tapestry of tension, curiosity, or veiled apprehension. As the household settled into a restless hush, Wimsey requested the return of the missing salver, one last object to be accounted for before the case could be closed. It was retrieved from the linen cupboard, where the housekeeper admitted she had placed it absent-mindedly, distracted by the evening's chaos. The polished silver gleamed under the gaslight, its cold surface reflecting more than just the flickering flames. Examining the salver with meticulous care, Wimsey's keen gaze found something previously overlooked, a barely perceptible smudge along its edge, a trace of an oily residue inconsistent with the household's usual polish. A clue hiding in plain sight, he mused, tracing the irregularity with a white-gloved finger. Turning to Inspector Carruthers, he proposed a closer examination of the servants' schedules and their proximity to the salver throughout the evening. This, he surmised, might reveal an accomplice, or at least someone unwittingly entangled in the crime's orchestration. A thorough inquiry among the staff followed. Most professed ignorance, their denials rehearsed and in places unconvincing. Yet it was the maid Eliza whose manner betrayed a flicker of unease. Noticing Wimsey's attentiveness, she hesitated before confessing a small but significant detail. She had seen Miss Evelina Harcourt handle the salver shortly before the evening's gathering, arranging it with particular care and a fleeting glance that suggested premeditation. This revelation struck Wimsey as a puzzle piece shifted unexpectedly. Evelina, previously considered a potential victim herself, now emerged as a figure enmeshed in the manipulation of the crime scene. Her notebook, with its cryptic entries and coded warnings, hinted at knowledge deeper than mere fear. Summoning Evelina for a quiet conversation in the library, Wimsey's tone remained measured but probing. "Miss Harcourt, your notebook speaks of shadows and final hours with an urgency that suggests you knew more than you allowed others to believe." Evelina's composure faltered, a subtle tremor in her fingers betraying inner turmoil. "I sought only to protect my sister and perhaps myself," she admitted softly. "Agatha and I were ensnared by Farnham's increasing demands and threats, but I never intended harm to come to anyone." Her words, while earnest, failed to dispel the growing suspicion that Evelina had played a more active role in the evening's dark events than previously acknowledged. Wimsey pondered the possibility that the salver's oily residue was a deliberate attempt to implicate her, or to deflect attention from the true perpetrator's hand. Turning next to the peculiar detail of the garden gate's loose latch, Wimsey revisited the timeline with renewed scrutiny. The gardener's testimony placed the gate's tampering just minutes before the murder, a narrow window for Farnham's ingress and egress. Yet, the servant staff's inconsistent accounts of their whereabouts suggested the presence of another unknown figure. Piecing together these inconsistencies, Wimsey hypothesized the existence of a second conspirator, perhaps motivated by a secret grievance or personal gain. His mind, ever methodical, traced the possible identities among those who might benefit from the victim's demise or Farnham's downfall. Attention fell upon the vicar, Reverend Alston, a man of outward piety but whose private dealings and recent disputes with the deceased had not escaped the astute observer's notice. Rumors whispered of financial entanglements and social ambitions at odds with the humble facade. Engaging Reverend Alston in a discreet interview, Wimsey employed his characteristic blend of gentle irony and incisive questioning. The vicar's initial composure gave way under the weight of pointed inquiries into his movements, His knowledge of the household dynamics, and his opinion of both Agatha and Evelina. It emerged that Alston had confronted Agatha on the night of the murder, a heated exchange fueled by Agatha's refusal to acquiesce to the vicar's subtle pressures. Yet, the Reverend vehemently denied any involvement beyond this disagreement, presenting an alibi supported by the local pub's landlord. Still, the puzzle persisted. The missing salver, the oily residue, the shadowy gate, and now the vicar's contentious presence. Whimsy, ever cautious, refrained from premature accusations, but resolved to expand his inquiry to the surrounding village, seeking corroboration of the evening's fragmented narrative. Late into the night, as the household slept uneasily, Whimsy sat alone with his thoughts, the notebook open before him. The coded passages, once cryptic, now hinted at a hidden communication, perhaps a cipher intended to warn or to expose. His fingers traced the words with deliberate care, deciphering the patterns concealed within Evelina's writings. A message emerged, one not of confession, but of conspiracy, implicating not only Farnham, but suggesting the involvement of another, someone cloaked in the trust of the household. The discovery was a turning point. It redefined the investigation's parameters, transforming it from a straightforward crime of passion into a layered drama of betrayal, manipulation, and the perilous interplay of appearances. Whimsy's gaze hardened with resolve. The game's final act awaited, and he intended to reveal it not with spectacle, but with the quiet, inexorable logic that had become his signature. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared for the confrontation that would lay bare the last veil of deceit, bringing clarity and justice to the shadows that had so long haunted Fenchurch Dallas. Lord Peter Wimsey rose from his solitary vigil with the notebook, the morning light filtering softly through the mullioned windows of Fenchurch Dallas. The quiet was deceptive, concealing the taut anticipation that gripped the household as whispers of renewed inquiry spread like a faint chill. With deliberate calm, Wimsey summoned Inspector Carruthers to the library. The cipher within Miss Harcourt's writings suggests a deeper web, one spun by more than Farnham alone. It is time we illuminate every corner, lest a shadow linger still. Carruthers, his expression a mixture of respect and apprehension, agreed to extend the investigation beyond the obvious suspects. Together, they methodically revisited the testimonies and physical evidence, each fragment weighed against the emerging hypothesis of collusion. A critical breakthrough came when the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, recalled a seemingly insignificant detail: the peculiar behavior of Mr. Blackwood, the solicitor who had handled Agatha's affairs. He lingered in the study unusually long that evening, and I thought his eyes betrayed a secret he wished to keep, she said. Wimsey immediately requested an interview with Blackwood, who presented himself with a veneer of professional composure. Yet beneath his polished exterior lay the subtle tremors of unease. The solicitor's alibi was fragile. His insistence on remaining at the manor well past dinner was contradicted by the cook's testimony, who claimed to have seen him leave before the time of death. Pressing gently but unrelentingly, Wimsey explored Blackwood's knowledge of the sister's financial entanglements and his relationship with Farnham. A pattern of strained interactions emerged. Blackwood had not only handled legal matters, but had voiced discreet concerns about Farnham's influence and possible extortion. More tellingly, the solicitor's responses hinted at a motive entwined with inheritance and control. Agatha's fortune, substantial and tightly guarded, was a prize not only coveted, but fiercely contested. Farnham's jealousy was but one facet of a multifaceted conflict. As Wimsey probed, Blackwood's defenses weakened. A furtive glance toward a side table revealed a small folded paper overlooked in previous searches. Wimsey's eyes caught the faint imprint of handwriting. He retrieved the note with gloved hands. It was a brief but damning correspondence, outlining a meeting arranged in secret between Blackwood and Farnham on the very evening of the murder. This clandestine rendezvous, ostensibly to discuss the victim's will, hinted at a darker negotiation, perhaps even conspiracy. Whimsy's next step was clear, reconstructing the timeline with this new information. He called for the return of the household and revisited the scene of the crime with a renewed focus. The salver's oily residue, now suspected to be a vehicle for subtle tampering, was re-examined under magnification. The detective noted a faint smudge consistent with a rare, slow-acting poison, one that would explain the gradual onset of the victim's symptoms, rather than immediate collapse. This revelation aligned with the refined timeline, whereby the fatal dose was administered not abruptly, but over a measured interval, with meticulous care. Whimsy mapped out the movements of Blackwood and Farnham within that critical hour. The gate's loose latch, previously understood as a facilitator for Farnham's secret entry, now appeared as a deliberate mechanism for the solicitor's exit, a silent signal to an accomplice or an escape route from suspicion. Furthermore, the peculiar almond scent noted by several witnesses was identified as an ingredient common to the poison's preparation, linking physical evidence with the subtle traces found on the salver and in the parlor air. The cumulative weight of these deductions left no room for doubt. The crime was not the product of a lone man's jealousy, but the result of a carefully orchestrated plot, driven by greed and the ruthless desire to manipulate legacies. Whimsy summoned the household once more. The tension was palpable, each face a mask of guarded fear or brittle confidence. With his usual blend of arch wit and incisive gravity, he began his final exposition. He recounted the timeline with clinical precision. The secret meeting between Farnham and Blackwood, the calculated tampering with the garden gate to disguise multiple comings and goings, the staged argument to distract attention, and the gradual administration of poison via the poisoned drink served from the now recovered salver. Each revelation landed like a hammer blow, dismantling the facades and exposing the tangled web of motives: Blackwood's greed, Farnham's jealousy, Evelina's desperation, and Agatha's tragic innocence caught in the crossfire. When Whimsy's gaze fixed on Blackwood, the solicitor's carefully maintained composure fractured. His protestations gave way to a confession laced with bitter irony, a recognition that his ambition had blinded him to the consequences, that the shadows he had sought to manipulate had ultimately engulfed him. Farnham, meanwhile, stood silently, his own guilt a heavy shroud. Evelina, though implicated in the concealment of facts, was revealed as a reluctant participant, a victim of circumstance rather than malice. As the household absorbed the verdict, Whimsy allowed himself a moment's satisfaction. Justice rendered, not through spectacle, but through the quiet, unyielding logic that had illuminated every dark corner of this perplexing case. Gathering his coat and hat, he prepared to depart, pausing by the threshold to offer a final reflection. The truth, as always, lies beneath the surface, obscured by the desire to protect secrets or save face. It is the detective's task to peel away those layers, revealing the human frailty at their core. With a final nod to Carruthers and a courteous farewell to the assembled company, Lord Peter Whimsy stepped out into the crisp morning air, the manor behind him settling once more into its brooding silence, its mysteries resolved, but its shadows forever imprinted upon those who dwelt within. The morning sun cast long, solemn shadows over Fenchurch Dallas as Lord Peter Whimsy stood once more in the great drawing-room, the air heavy with the residue of secrets newly laid bare. The assembled household faces taut, eyes wary awaited the final pronouncement, the last unveiling of truth that would untangle the intricate web spun over so many tense hours. Whimsy's gaze swept over the group with characteristic poise, arching an eyebrow as if amused by the theater in which he had so carefully orchestrated the last act. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice measured yet carrying that unmistakable sotto voce of dry irony, "we have been presented with a labyrinth of shadows and half-truths. Yet, as with all such puzzles, the solution lies not in the exotic or the spectral, but in the very human failings of ambition, fear, and deceit. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. Miss Evelina Harcourt's notebook was not merely a journal, but a ciphered warning, a desperate attempt to expose not only Farnham's menace, but the darker hand guiding events from behind the scenes. The oily residue on the silver salver, the subtle traces of a slow-acting poison, these are the tangible threads that bind our tale. Turning towards Mr. Blackwood, whose pallor betrayed his mounting guilt, Whimsy's voice took on an edge of quiet accusation. You, Mr. Blackwood, sought to secure control over the Harcourt estate by eliminating obstacles, Agatha and Farnham. Alike, your secret meeting that night, your calculated tampering with the garden gate, the poisoned draught administered with such careful timing, all bear your unmistakable signature. Blackwood's defiant gaze wavered as he muttered a half-hearted denial, only to be silenced by the detective's steady gaze. The inconsistencies in your alibi, the contradictory witness statements, and the note discovered in your own hand unravel the web you spun so precariously. Whimsy shifted attention to Farnham, whose posture was one of sullen resignation. As for you, Mr. Farnham, your jealousy and threats cast a long shadow, but it was not the sole motive. You were a pawn as much as a player, manipulated by greed and blinded by passion. The assembled company exchanged glances relief, mingled with shock as the threads of their intertwined fates were laid bare. Whimsy concluded with a measured wryness. The temptation to cloak such deeds in the Gothic or the occult is strong. In places like Fenchurch Dallas, where the past lingers and the wind whispers secrets. Yet, the truth demands no supernatural invocation. It is, after all, a matter of human folly, fear, and avarice masquerading behind polished silver and genteel manners. As the local constabulary moved to take Blackwood into custody, and Farnham's fate awaited the due process of law, Evelina was gently led away to recover from the ordeal, her role as reluctant conspirator acknowledged with a measure of compassion. Whimsy gathered his belongings, his customary cigar perched lightly between fingers. One finds, he remarked to Inspector Carruthers as they stepped onto the dew-fresh lawn, that the most perplexing mysteries are often those closest to home, disguised beneath the veneer of civility, and that the most potent poison is not always the one administered in draught or on silver salvers, but that of human weakness. With a final dry quip, I dare say, a touch less melodrama and a little more logic might serve us all better in the future. He tipped his hat. Mounting his car, the engine's hum broke the morning stillness, carrying him away from the somber estate, leaving behind a house returned, if only momentarily, to quiet repose. Fenchurch Dallas, with its whispered secrets and shadowed corridors, would keep its memories of that dark night, but for now, just as precise, unyielding, and profoundly human, had been served.